Hello and welcome back to Indistinct Chatter. I'm Eliza, and boy, oh boy, am I taking it back this week. First off, did you see A24's trailer for Primetime? A24 aside, this looks like it's going to be a great movie. I think Robert Pattinson is a severely underrated actor. I would have thought by now that he would have been given his flowers, but aside from being well known, I feel like a lot of people just don't realize how good he is at transforming into a character. Plus, he's kind of this weird little freak in the best way. So I think we should all be watching his work real closely. The way he not only hides his accent in a role like you forget he's British, but he completely transforms his face, his eyes, all of the mannerisms, like large and small. And in this trailer, he is fully embodying Chris Hansen to the point that I thought it was a voiceover. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, Primetime is a film coming to theaters this September on the 25th. It's about the making of To Catch a Predator, the Dateline NBC series that turned hidden camera sting operations into must-see TV back in the mid-2000s. This is one of those shows that my mom would sometimes let me watch with her, like not all the time, but I remember watching it every once in a while. It was absolutely fascinating. It was good to just see the bad guy get caught, you know? It was also a little scary because you kind of realize then, like, oh, these people exist. These disgusting people are out there. But for that brief moment, it was kind of like a small victory almost. Like, yes, we got it. One less predator off the streets, you know? Anyway, so Pattinson plays Chris Hansen, the correspondent who became the face of the whole show, the whole movement, honestly. And who knew that just saying, I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC would become such an iconic line? Also, why don't you have a seat over there? You see how this looks? I can't do impressions, so I'm not even trying. But one of my favorite lines, I don't know how often he said it. It might have just been like a one-off that was just like really iconic to the point that it sticks with a lot of people. But there is a line where he says, have a seat. Let's talk about a little known subject called complete lack of judgment. Like, oh, it's so funny. It's so good. And honestly, it's a line that can be used for any situation when someone messes up. So yeah, the movie. Anyway, it follows how a new segment about adults trying to meet kids online exploded into this like huge ratings monster. Honestly, NBC executives didn't even like the show to start with, but America just ate that shit up. And the movie kind of digs into what that success did to the people making it. The team keeps chasing bigger things. Then, you know, the line between journalism and entertainment, it just gets blurrier and blurrier. And it's all building toward the sting that in real life ended the whole show, which I'll get into later. Primetime is directed by Lance Oppenheim, who actually comes from documentary filmmaking. This is his first scripted feature, and it's based on a 2007 Esquire article called Tonight on Dateline, This Man Will Die. So obviously the movie isn't hiding where the story is going to be going. Ari Aster produced it. Pattinson also produced it. And the cast includes Merritt Wever, Skylar Gazondo, and Phoebe Bridgers. And like I said, it's going to premiere in theaters on September 25th. I think it goes to the Venice Film Festival first, earlier in September. And then we'll get it on the 25th. And so for today, I thought that I would get into all of it. To Catch a Predator. If you don't know the lore of this show and you want it to unfold for you in the film, skip this episode and save it for next month because I'm going to be going into all the lore, going over all the bombshells. I know all of this and I'm so extremely excited for the film. And, you know, it's based on a true story, so we know how it ends, but I get it if you want to wait. I think you're safe to listen, but I get it. I'll still be here. I'll still love you. Also, trigger warning, this content does involve adults preying on children, which I know is a very hard subject to listen to. There's also mention of suicide, another tough subject. I don't get into the nitty-gritty, but I do talk about it briefly, so just a trigger warning there. And with that being said, let's begin. So, to understand To Catch a Predator, we have to do what we do best here at Indistinct Chatter. we have to time travel. We're going to go way, way, way back to the way back internet, to the World Wide Web of the early 2000s. AOL chat rooms, aim away messages, which, okay, listen, I was always under the impression that only people with a lot of money had AIM. I was an MSN girly because it was free. Did AIM cost anything? I don't know. I think you had to have AOL to have AIM, and I think AOL was more money than like the local internet. I don't remember, but I was watching this movie, Fear Street, and one of the kids even said that AOL was expensive. So there's that. I think it did cost more. I don't know. Either way, I thought AIM was for rich people. Back to the time travel. So we're going back to dial up, screeching at you while your mom was letting you know. Maybe she was hollering at you that she needed the phone. Who knows? The point I'm trying to make here is kids were online, alone, in numbers that had never existed before in human history, and parents had no idea what was actually happening in those chat rooms. Also, another side note, do you guys remember chat roulette? Girl, that was rough. I remember I would go on chat roulette like only with my friends, but then one day I was home bored. I probably was like homesick, I don't remember, and I decided to just log on. Scared me straight, I tell ya. First of all, I never had my webcam on, and if I did with my friends, like we never had it at a window because I was under the impression that if they could see out your window, they would know where you lived. I don't know. But do you know why chat roulette? Do you want to know what set me straight? I'm pretty sure while going through chat roulette, you might think I'm crazy, but I'm pretty sure I saw someone who had hanged themselves. And sometimes, obviously, there would be movie marketing that would sneak in on chat roulette, but I don't think that's what I saw. I was terrified. I was so scared. I got such an uneasy feeling. I unplugged the computer. And I don't think I went back on chat roulette for years, like not until after I graduated high school or something. And I think the next time was my last time. And I think that was at my friend Mackenzie's house. And then I was done with it. So yeah, chat rooms were scary, and chat rooms had no age verification, no restrictions. Even if you were in like a children's chat room, adults would be in there. So enter a group called Perverted Justice. So they started in the early 2000s as a volunteer watchdog group, and their whole thing was basically that adults would pose as minors in chat rooms. They'd wait for grown men to approach them online. They would document everything, and then they would expose these men. And at first, they were just posting the chat logs and the photos online themselves, public shaming, essentially, some of the earliest internet vigilantes, really. Dateline NBC saw what they were doing and thought, hey now, what if we did that, but with cameras and a house? So in November 2004, Dateline aired a segment called Dangerous Web, filmed in Bethpage, Long Island. They rented a house, they wired it with hidden cameras, and had perverted justice decoys chat with men online, posing as underage teenagers. The men were invited to the house to meet the teen, and when they walked in, instead of a kid, they got Chris Hansen stepping out from behind a wall. Now, if you've seen To Catch a Predator, you know there's usually police waiting outside. But for these first stings, there were no police involved. And in the premiere, there was a New York City fireman who had sent sexually graphic footage of himself to a decoy. He had showed up at the house. He got confronted by Chris Hansen on camera, and then he just left. He walked out, went home, went wherever, who knows? Dateline was a news program, not law enforcement. Nobody had the power to arrest anyone. Of course, as you can guess, viewers lost their minds about this. The reaction was basically like, so you're telling me you caught these men red-handed and nothing gets done about it. They just get to keep living their lives and being predators. So by the third investigation, local police were directly involved. Men would get the Hansen treatment inside the house. They would hear another one of his famous lines, "You're free to go." They'd walk out the door thinking, phew, that was close. And then they'd get tackled by officers on their way out. And that takedown, like literally that physical takedown moment, became just as iconic as the interview inside the house. Also, I think it's important to note here, Perverted Justice didn't stay volunteers. They started as volunteers. They didn't stay that way. NBC started paying them as consultants and paid actors. So hold on to that little bit of information because it's kind of one of the main loose threads here, or one of the main things where it created like a blurry line. But the show got renamed. It got renamed to Catch a Predator, and it became this huge monster hit. 12 investigations across the country included Riverside County, California, Greenville, Ohio, Fortson, Georgia, Petaluma, California, Long Beach, California, Flagler Beach, Florida, Ocean County, New Jersey, and Murphy, Texas, which we will get to in a minute here. First, you ready for your skin to crawl? Are you ready to feel sick to your stomach? Do you know how many men showed up at these stings? 35 men in 3 days showed up at one of the locations in Long Beach, 24 men in 4 days in Murphy, 28 men in 3.5 days at the Jersey Shore. And these weren't shadowy figures in trench coats. They weren't exactly what you'd maybe at the time picture a predator to look like or to be. I think at the time there was a lot less visualization of these predators. So the show exposed that these were teachers, doctors, rabbis, firemen, military members, married fathers, and one man showed up to a sting 8 months after being caught in a previous sting. So he had already been through all of this, and yet this sicko came back. Like, ugh, get real. Disgusting. Makes my skin crawl. But let's move on and let's focus on the man in the suit for now, shall we? Chris Hansen was born Christopher Edward Hansen on September 13th, 1959 in Chicago. Chris said he knew at 14, after following the police and FBI investigation of the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, that he wanted to be a journalist. He went on to graduate from Michigan State University with a bachelor's in telecommunication in 1981. And during his senior year of college, he actually became a reporter for NBC affiliate WILX in Lansing, Michigan. He jumped around a little bit, reporting from Tampa and Detroit, and then in 1993, he joined NBC News as a correspondent for Now with Tom Brokaw and Katie Couric. So, before he became this iconic person, before he became a meme, before he was parodied in movies and TV shows, Chris Hansen was a legitimately decorated journalist. He spent 20 years at NBC News. He covered the Unabomber, the Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine, and September 11th. We're talking 10 Emmys and 5 Edward R. Murrow Awards over his career. Chris wasn't just some guy that they chose because he had a good, scary dad voice. He was a serious correspondent, which is why the show ended up working so well. When he stepped out from behind that wall with his transcripts, his receipts, if you will, he carried himself with this authority of a prosecutor or a therapist or, just someone with power without actually being that person with power. I mean, in a sense, with his show and the cops outside, he kind of had power, but you get what I'm saying. He would sit these men down, read their own words back to them, let them squirm, let them confess to him. Like, he wasn't a cop. He couldn't charge anyone with anything, but he looked and sounded like he was that person, like he could punish them. He had the suit, the calm voice, the little folder of chat logs. It was theater, kind of, if you think about it, just like incredible theater. And honestly, kind of giving me Miranda Priestley vibes, like just a little bit. Or maybe she gives Chris Hansen vibes, like with the stoic nature and everything. And he never yells at them. He never like calls them names. He's very calm. Get what I'm saying? Anyway, so like I mentioned, the catchphrases, they became bigger than the show. Why don't you have a seat over there? I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC. You're free to go, which, you're not actually free to go. He was parodied on Saturday Night Live, 30 Rock. He was on Oprah. He showed up on The Simpsons. There is still, to this day, an active message board called the Temple of TCAP, To Catch a Predator, where fans catalog every man ever caught on the show. And that message board is actually how the Predators documentary got made, which I just watched, but we'll come back to that. So for 3 years, Chris Hansen was one of the most famous faces on television. And then it all unraveled in a suburb outside of Dallas. Before we dive into what happened outside of Dallas, I just want to say, I don't know if this is like in defense of the show or what, but I do want to point these out. First, men did go to prison because of this show, and rightfully so. And Perverted Justice has claimed over 650 convictions came out of their work overall. And while that's their own number, plenty of individual cases are documented. In the Riverside County sting alone, 51 men were arrested in 3 days. And within about a year and a half, 19 of them had pleaded guilty. One man pleaded guilty to 3 felonies, including attempted sodomy with a child under 14, and he got 5 years in state prison. These are real predators from communities taken off the streets, keeping kids safer. And that's what we like to hear. Also, the show made internet safety a dinner table conversation. In 2004, parents genuinely did not understand what could happen to their kid in a chat room. To be fair, they hadn't grown up with computers, let alone access to the internet where strangers could just start talking to you willy-nilly. We were all kind of learning as we went, To catch a predator, put the topic and the conversation in our living rooms in the most visceral way possible. The men showing up at that house, they weren't strangers with candy cartoons. They were often a guy from church, the kid's soccer coach, your coworker. And that reframing made such a huge difference because statistically, we didn't know this at the time, or it wasn't like that much in our face at the time, but statistically, most abuse comes from someone the victim already knows. And this show made that uncomfortably visible. For my next point, there is kind of a catch-22 to it. So although this show deterred many men from acting on their weird, sick fantasies, some men that were caught on the show had admitted that they had already seen the show. So they knew what that house was, the Sting house. They knew who Chris Hansen was, and they came anyway. So for these sickos, whatever their drive was, the threat of humiliation on national television wasn't enough to stop them. And that's kind of a question that lingers, and it's one that I had while watching Predators, that documentary. If this isn't preventing, what's it actually for? Like, if men are seeing the show and still showing up, like, what is this for? So again, I will come back to my existential question in a minute here, so hold on to that. So it was getting to this point where while America was cheering, while my mom and I were probably in our living room, we're probably going, yes, take that, you freak. While all that was happening, people inside and around the show were getting a little uneasy. So I'm going to start with the entrapment problem. And this is where it's kind of like, yeah, okay, 2 things can be true. Like, you can respect the legality of things while also wishing all the pedos were locked up. Legally, entrapment is when law enforcement induces someone to commit a crime they wouldn't have otherwise committed. The show always maintained that these men came willingly, that they were the ones who initiated the sexual conversations, and that they drove themselves to the house. And in most cases, courts agreed, and most of these men pleaded guilty. But not all of them. In the Petaluma sting, 29 men were arrested, 28 pleaded guilty, but one man, a Navy sailor, took his case to trial and was acquitted. And the judge in that case didn't just acquit him. He went out of his way to criticize Dateline and Perverted Justice, saying their tactics lacked credibility and amounted to entrapment. The sailor still spent a year in jail before the acquittal and got kicked out of the Navy, so it's not a great look. Then there's the whistleblower, Marsha Bartel. She does not get talked about enough. Bartel was a veteran NBC producer who joined the show in early 2006. She worked on 4 stings that led to 112 arrests. Like, she was good at this. But she became increasingly disturbed by what she was seeing. According to the lawsuit she later filed, she complained repeatedly that the show violated NBC's own ethical guidelines. Her core argument was one of the things that I told you to remember earlier. NBC was paying Perverted Justice, and in her view, paying them created a financial incentive for the decoys to trick targets, to push conversations, to manufacture catches. Her filing claimed decoys sometimes begged men to come to the house after those men had decided to walk away. She also said she couldn't even get the identities of the Perverted Justice volunteers or complete chat transcripts to verify anything, which for a news organization, that's kind of a big no-no. Like, you're a journalist, verifying is kind of the job. Bartel says she refused to keep working on the show, and 4 months later, she was let go in a round of layoffs. She sued for $1 million, claiming retaliation. However, her lawsuit was ultimately dismissed, but the allegations in it were already out there in court documents and in the public. So, literally, the warning was on record, but the show kept on rolling. So, 1 month before Marcia was let go in December 2006, in Murphy, Texas, in November, in a well-off suburb of about 11,000 people, Dateline and Perverted Justice approached the city manager, a man named Craig Sherwood, about running a sting there. So a big red flag here is that Craig approved it without telling the mayor or the city council. Supposedly keeping the secret was for the sake of the operation, but it is not a good look to not have the elected officials, aka the people the police actually answered to, not have any idea a national television production was about to run a sting operation with their police department. Over 4 days, 24 men were arrested at the Sting house, but there was one more man on the list who never showed up. That was Louis William Conradt Jr., who went by Bill. He was 56 years old, and he was the chief felony assistant district attorney for Rockwall County. Before that, he had been the elected district attorney of Kaufman County. This man had spent decades prosecuting criminals, including at points in his career the exact kind of crime this sting was built around. Colleagues described him as a talented prosecutor with a near photographic memory for the law. And he engaged in a sexually explicit online chat with a perverted justice decoy posing as a 13-year-old boy. The decoys tried to get him to come to the house, but he wouldn't. Whether he got suspicious or got cold feet or a change of heart, we don't know, but he stopped responding and never traveled to Murphy. And this is kind of the moment that everything changed for the show, because at this point, the show had a choice. Remember, the format of the show was man comes to house, man gets confronted, man gets arrested. Bill didn't come to the house, so there was no television moment. Wah, wah, bummer, but oh well, we move on, right? No. They went to him. Police obtained arrest and search warrants, but later reporting found serious problems with how those warrants were drawn up. A SWAT team went to Bill's home in Terrell, Texas, and this wasn't like a quiet knock knock. This wasn't even like a pound at the door. A full-blown Dateline camera crew was set up on the street outside of his house. When officers entered the home, they confronted Bill, who was holding a gun. He said to them that he wasn't going to hurt them, and he turned the gun on himself and shot himself. He died later on that day in a hospital in Dallas. He was never arrested, he was never charged, and he never had a trial. Obviously, if allegations are accurate, what Bill said and did in those chats was disgusting and inexcusable, and he deserved to be investigated. He deserved to be charged. He deserved to be prosecuted, all that stuff by the actual justice system, though, like with all of their rules and their paperwork and all the rights that apply to everyone fairly, and with the ideal justice system. That's a whole other topic, though, but the point is still the same. The system exists so that when it works correctly and fairly and justly, it exists so that no one, not a vigilante group, not a TV producer, not even a SWAT team with cameras behind them, gets to be judge, jury, and executioner. Bill's sister, Patricia, said police had acted as exactly that: judge, jury, and executioner, egged on by what she called an out-of-control reality show. And a former Murphy detective named Walt Weiss, who was there, said it himself years later in the Predators documentary. They went to that house because it would do something for the show, not for safety, not for law enforcement, for the show. He called his own role in it a stain on his soul. And the fallout was immediate. The Collin County District Attorney, John Roach, refused to prosecute a single one of the 24 men arrested in Murphy. He said the cases were tainted by the involvement of amateurs, and in 16 of them, his office didn't even have jurisdiction because of where the online chats technically took place. So the sting that was supposed to prove don't mess with Murphy produced 0 prosecutions and 1 death. The city manager who approved it lost his job. Patricia sued NBC for more than $100 million, and a federal judge allowed major parts of the case to move forward, which is when NBC settled out of court for an undisclosed amount back in 2008. The final investigation aired in December 2007, and the show was over by 2008. Chris Hansen has said to this day that the show wasn't canceled because of Murphy, that it simply ran its course after 3 years. I mean, you can decide for yourself how much you want to believe that. I think if this had aired today, they probably would have kept it going. Well, actually, I don't know. Hollywood and billionaires and shit, they love their predators and they love to protect them. So I don't know. If Chris was doing this today, maybe he would have gotten the axe, like the literal axe, if you know what I mean. So, what happens to the most famous predator catcher in America when the catching stops? Well, for a while, Hansen stayed at NBC doing spinoffs. To catch a con man, to catch an ID thief. You know, the hidden camera, that's his brand. But then the hidden cameras turned around on him. In 2011, tabloid reports surfaced alleging that Hansen, who was married, was having an affair with a Florida television reporter about 20 years younger than him. The report said that he was caught on hidden camera. Uh-oh. Hansen declined to comment on it, and he stayed at NBC for a while longer, but in 2013, the network did not renew his contract, ending a 30-year run. In 2015, Hansen tried to bring the format back himself with a Kickstarter for a show called Hansen vs. Predator. He asked for $400,000. He received $89,000. The show limped along as a segment on Crime Watch Daily, which he hosted until it ended in 2018. And then for the backers who were promised mugs and t-shirts for their donations, well, a lot of them never ended up getting their merch. And that brings us to January 2019 when Chris Hansen was arrested. Chris Hansen, for real. He turned himself into police in Stamford, Connecticut on a felony charge of issuing bad checks. He had bought about $13,000 worth of promotional merch, hats, shirts, and mugs from a local vendor, and the check bounced. The vendor gave him some time. Hansen wrote another check, and that one bounced too. He paid full restitution, and the case was dropped a couple weeks later, but the mugshot still exists, which is kind of wild to think about. Like, Chris Hansen having a mugshot, that's wild. Then in 2021, a warrant briefly went out for his arrest in Michigan after he missed a court date connected to a sting he had assisted police with. That got resolved too, but that's when folks were starting to see a not so great pattern with him. But nevertheless, he persisted. Throughout all of that, he never stopped. He co-founded a true crime streaming service called True Blue in 2020 and launched Takedown with Chris Hansen, which is the same format all over again. He has a YouTube channel with over 500,000 subscribers. He still shows up in local news stories, partnering with sheriff's departments. The man is in his 60s, and he is not letting the bastards keep him down. He is still walking into rooms, letting them know he is Chris motherfucking Hansen. Did he cross some lines? Did the show cross some lines? Yeah, definitely. But at the end of the day, they were catching predators. And he's not going to stop. He won't stop. And for that, I can't really hate on him. I don't care about his personal life. I mean, cheating's bad. Writing bad checks is bad. Not showing up to court is bad. But preying on children is infinitely worse. And he's the predator catcher. Okay, so the show died in 2008, but the format of the show is immortal, obviously. At the time, it was already this candid camera type show, and people really just ate that shit up. And that's kind of the part that worries me a little bit. Like, that whole format, filming someone without their knowledge for exploitation, it trickles into the icky territory for me. Recording for your own safety is one thing, but recording for likes and subscribers and comments and money and whatever, just I don't know. It gets a little icky to me. And among all the memes that To Catch a Predator left, it also left behind this blueprint. And this blueprint wasn't just left for other journalists and legal departments for ethical guidelines. The blueprint was left for anyone with or without ethics. There is now an entire ecosystem of YouTube and Facebook predator hunters, hundreds of groups, honestly, maybe thousands, especially on TikTok. Some of them run their stings live, streaming confrontations in parking lots and Walmarts to tens of thousands of viewers. One hunter's channel has over 57,000 subscribers with individual videos pulling more than 300,000 views. For comparison, I rarely crack double digits. But this is a content genre now. There are donation links, there's merch, it's a whole thing. And like, to be fair, look, I get the impulse. If the professionals with the lawyers got results, why shouldn't regular people? We want predators off the streets. But here's what the professionals version already taught us. Even with the lawyers, even with a decorated journalist, even with actual police partnerships, they produced tainted cases, an entrapment acquittal, a whistleblower lawsuit, and a death. That was the version with guardrails. So what's it look like without the guardrails? Well, in Illinois, the founder of a group called KTS Predator Hunters was indicted after prosecutors said he lured a man into his car, wouldn't let him out, and threatened to hit him. The state's attorney put out a statement saying that when citizens take justice into their own hands, even for laudable, worthy purposes, they endanger themselves and they endanger others and they damage actual cases. In Oklahoma, the founder of a group called Oklahoma Predator Prevention was arrested on felony charges after a confrontation left a man unconscious. An investigation into that group found they targeted vulnerable people, including confronting a man with autism on a live stream, bullying and humiliating targets for the camera while making about $1,500 a month off the videos. In Pennsylvania, multiple cases against men caught by a hunter group got dismissed because state law simply doesn't allow vigilante collected evidence to carry a prosecution. So the men walked away because the hunters' own methods set them free. And another one of my worries about all of this is that these groups can accuse the wrong person. They can blow up legitimate investigations already in progress. Like, they answer to no one. There's no chief, there's no department, no city council, no ethics team or like ethics complaint that you can file. There's no HR. There's just a guy, a vlogging camera, and an audience that is foaming at the mouth for a takedown of any kind. They don't care. And something I keep coming back to and something mentioned in the documentary a few times is the whole thing about the police. Like, they are supposed to answer to their department, their chief, and their constituents. They're not supposed to answer to a TV producer, and definitely not to a YouTube algorithm. And that brings me back to Murphy, Texas. Would things have been different if the city manager hadn't made a secret deal with a television show? Would the show still be going? Would we be making legitimate arrests? The elected officials found out about it only after a man was dead. Every one of those live stream hunters is running a tiny budget version of that same arrangement, except now there's no NBC to sue. There's no one to be held accountable. So all of this history came roaring back in 2025 with a documentary called Predators, directed by David Ossett. It premiered at Sundance. Critics loved it. It's sitting, I think, at 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, and you can watch it now on Paramount Plus. I watched it the other night, and I don't know, I have some thoughts. So first, David found that Temple of TCAT message board that I mentioned earlier, and like me, he fell down a rabbit hole. He ended up making a film in 3 parts. The original show, the copycats, and then a reckoning with the whole thing, including a sit-down with Chris Hansen himself. He also interviewed the decoys. He interviewed Skeeter Jean, or Skeeter Jean, I don't know how he says it, a YouTube imitator who started ambushing people because he felt that the other ambush guys didn't really have the je ne sais quoi. They didn't have Chris Hansen's, like, gravitas. And David shows the raw, unaired footage from the original stings, the stuff that didn't make air because it was too human or too messy. And David puts himself in it. He shares that he's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and that part of why this show gripped him was the hope that somewhere in all of those hours of footage, some man sitting across from Chris Hansen would finally explain why someone preys on children. But he never really gets the answer. It's not really there. Chris in the show, it asked, what are you doing here? But it didn't really ask what made you. And honestly, no one in the documentary can really answer it either. The biggest observation that I got is that some of these men seem to know what they are and they know it's wrong, but like they won't seek help themselves unless they're forced, which pretty fucking bleak. And honestly, the only intervention this country reliably offers is a camera crew and a felony charge. There's basically no prevention infrastructure. So instead, we built an entertainment genre. It's very American of us. Now, I did think the documentary is smart. I think it's beautifully made, but there were moments where I feel like it lost me a little bit because at some points it edges up to a framing where you're invited to feel sympathy. You're invited to feel something for these men because their lives were ruined, you know? There's an ethnographer in the film who says that when you show these men as human beings, the show kind of breaks down. And academically, sure, I get that point. Dehumanization made the show watchable. Humans are weird. We're weird. But I kept waiting for the same runtime, the same tenderness, the same lingering camera for victims, for survivors. And although they do interview one of the YouTube catcher decoy people, I feel like there was still like this huge imbalance. Like, I get that for the show, for To Catch a Predator, they use adult decoys, right? They're not going to use real children. But there are real children out there not getting the same compassion that I felt that this documentary was kind of edging towards for these predators. David himself has said directly that he is not asking anyone to sympathize with child predators, and I do believe that that is his intent, and his own story is proof that he knows the cost better than most. But intent and effect are different things, and the documentary left me feeling like the ruined lives of men get more screen time than the lives they were there to ruin. And mind you, they're there to ruin innocent lives. And in the process, they are ruining their own lives. They have control over it. So like in every aspect, they have control. And I don't know, that just doesn't sit right for me. So just to be quite frank with where I stand, if it isn't already obvious, I don't fuck with predators. I hate them. I think they are sick in the head. I have no sympathy for a predator. This documentary, it didn't change my mind. And because there's always nuance, do I believe a person can be disgusting, get help, and genuinely change and never act that way again? Sure, absolutely. That would be the most ideal situation, right? Wanting treatment and prevention to exist isn't sympathy for predators. It's prevention. It's eradication. I wish that the documentary would have went more into that direction of explaining prevention, but whatever. Every person who gets help before they hurt a child is a child who doesn't get hurt. And that's the whole thing for me. It's the victims. They should always be the main point of it. And the strangest legacy of To Catch a Predator is that a show supposedly about protecting kids barely ever mentions them. Maybe that's for good reason, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, obviously, for safety reasons, it's a good thing to not have kids on camera for this. Just in general, kids shouldn't be on camera. And obviously, we don't want them at the sting houses or part of the investigation. So I get that part. That makes total sense. But I don't know. This format is just very like shock value based to me, which is when it starts to make me wonder, you know, like what is the purpose? But then I'm like, okay, well, if it's getting predators away, it's for the greater good, right? Ethics, man, they are wild. And that brings us back to Primetime in theaters, September 25th, and why I think this movie is arriving at exactly the right moment. The question the movie is apparently asking, based on that trailer, is the same one Murphy, Texas forced us to ask back in 2006, and the same one every live stream hunter forces us to wonder about today. What happens when justice becomes content? Is it when the arrest is the season finale? Is it when the police work for the producer? Where is that line? To Catch a Predator caught real predators, but it also got 0 convictions out of its most infamous sting. It got a whistleblower's warning ignored, and it ended with a man dead in his own house while cameras waited outside. And then it spawned 1,000 imitators with none of its restraint. Like, there's good and bad. Two things can be true. But I think that's what the film looks like. It's going to explore. And I love when something makes you take a look at your morals or your ethics, whatever, and it makes you look at them in a new light. And that's how we learn, that's how we grow. So I'm excited for that. I'm curious if my opinion will evolve or change after seeing this. If this movie hits the way I think it might, we may be doing part 2 for this episode. So consider this your homework. Oh my gosh, who am I giving out homework? Wow. Um, maybe instead of being bossy, I'm just going to ask that you watch the trailer, maybe watch Predators on Paramount Plus if you can handle it. It doesn't get too graphic or anything. It is quite interesting to watch. And then DM me your take because I want to know if the imbalance hit you the same way it hit me. Also, I do have 2 more suggestions, not homework. I'm going to try to recommend at least 2 things in every episode. So, whether it's a book, a movie, maybe an album or a song or a video, whatever, I'm going to try to recommend 2 things. So, aside from Predators, the documentary, I suggest the movie Nightcrawler and the book So You've Been Publicly Shamed. In So You've Been Publicly Shamed, the author, Jon Ronson, a journalist, he goes and he finds people whose lives fell apart after they became the internet's main character for a day. A bad joke, a dumb photo, a moment of poor judgment, and then millions of strangers descend. He interviews them about, like what the pile-on actually did to their lives, to their jobs, their mental health. And along the way, he digs into the history of public shaming as punishment, why we abandoned it, and why the internet is kind of bringing it back, just with no rules attached. The uncomfortable part is that Ronson admits that he's participated in pile-ons himself, so it's definitely not this lecture-y, talk down to you, do-gooder type of book. It's just him realizing what he's been a part of. I do have a little caveat about public shaming, and that is that sometimes public shaming works and it can be helpful, but of course, there's always that line. So that's why I recommend the book. And then my next recommendation is a 2014 movie called Nightcrawler. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal, who plays Lou Bloom, a broke, intense loner in LA who, he discovers that there's some pretty good money in filming crime scenes and car crashes at night and selling the footage to a local news station. He turns out to be pretty disturbingly good at it, and the film follows how far he's willing to go to get better footage and how the news station, hungry for ratings, keeps rewarding him instead of stopping him. It is a thriller, but it's really about the incentive machine. The audience wants to see it. The station wants to air it. So somebody like Lou will always exist to film it. And it's an interesting movie. I recommend it. I mean, it gets a little bloody, but it is what it is. And that's the show, friends. If you learned something or if you have thoughts, hot takes, suggestions, stories, send me a DM. You can find the podcast on Instagram at indistinct.pod. You can find me at Eliza Hollister. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff wherever you're listening. It helps so much and it makes me so happy and grateful. We will chat next week. Love ya. Love you. Bye.